any reasonable expenses. So, for example, let's say an employee, somebody in their house got COVID, and
Okay.
they wanted to not be in that scenario while they're working because they're working from home. You could, as an employer, rent an Airbnb for them, and
Got
that
it.
would be considered a reasonable expense. That would, if they paid for the Airbnb, you could reimburse them, or as a business, you could pay for it,
Okay.
and it's a business deduction, or it's a tax-free reimbursement to the employee.
This is BetterWealth with Caleb Guilliams. We're going to be talking about the disaster relief and how you can provide your employees tax-free income using the tax-free COVID-19 relief plan. And I'm here with Dan Kaminsky, who is heading up our BetterWealth Tax. You can go to betterwealthtax.com to learn more and tell us about how we can use this plan to put money back into our team's hands.
Yeah, so the IRC Section 139 is considered disaster relief, and this is doesn't happen very often, but the pandemic has been an example of the entire country has been mandated as a federal disaster relief zone. And so what that means is that the key word again, reasonable here, any reasonable expenses related to the pandemic can be deducted by your business and be tax-free to employees.
Okay. So walk me through that again.
So any reasonable expenses. So for example, let's say an employee, somebody in their house got COVID, and they wanted to not be in that scenario while they're working because they're working from home. You could, as an employer, rent an Airbnb for them, and that would be considered a reasonable expense. That would, if they paid for the Airbnb, you could reimburse them, or as a business, you could pay for it.
Okay.
And it's a business deduction, or it's a tax-free reimbursement to the employee.
Got it.
And so again, the expenses can be paid or reimbursed. So, and things have to be reasonable. So you can't go buy a Ferrari and say that that's a reasonable business.
COVID
expense.
was a rough year. You needed to,
Yeah. So it's like, again, housing, it's childcare costs because, school is not in session, and you either are going to have them at home or you're going to have them at a daycare or something of that nature. Technology to work remotely, grocery delivery services. Like there's a lot of things that you could categorize as reasonable expenses as it relates to the disaster relief. And the cool thing about this is it is not considered compensation. So if you were paying for grocery delivery for an employee, typically that would be something that is considered it's like a benefit. It's like a fringe benefit, and so it would be considered compensation. But because this is in the disaster relief, there's no payments or there's no, it's not constituted as compensation. So it's not like wages or sick pay or things like that.
So let's walk through this. So if we were to buy a computer for one of our team members, in any year we could write that off, right?
Correct.
Because that's a business expense. So what's the difference? Is it mainly for things like childcare or groceries, or even like I think an Airbnb or a hotel, you could write the whole thing off, but is it for those examples that normally would have to be a fringe benefit that would get passed on?
Correct. So it's like things to be able to work from home. So like typically things like if you paid for internet or a cell phone or something like that, it would typically be considered like a fringe benefit to the employee.
Got it.
And that would have to be reported as income and so in this fashion, again, because this is unordinary times, this is kind of like it opens up the veil and allows you to do some pretty unique things. And again, so because it's not considered compensation, it doesn't, from the employer's perspective, there's no Social Security, Medicare, unemployment type stuff that has anything to do with this. It's just truly a savings that's passed on. And as always, this whole thing is just like everything else. Maintain the reasonable nature of it and keep documentation.
Document.
And again, this can get a little bit squirrely because people like to take advantage of these things. But again, it's like what could you constitute? What is considered reasonable in this time? And there's even things like if an employee's family member dies of COVID-19, that you could pay some reasonable expenses to take care of that.
Could the employee do something and deduct this, or is it solely for you wanting to help your team members, and as a result, that's not going to be counted as a fringe benefit, so the more of that money is going to go? It's your team member or employee can't deduct childcare.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is something that employers can do for their employees, and there's actually on that front too, because this can get complicated. It can add more work to the employee from a tax perspective. Is a lot of the payroll providers are actually putting things in place right now, because this is actually relatively new, even though it was in effect last year. Now payroll providers are starting to put things in place that are specific to Disaster 139 or Section 139, so that if things are reimbursed or paid for, it's all accounted for and taken care of, so it doesn't add any additional work to the person that's getting the benefit.
I love it. The tax-free COVID-19 relief package, bill or whatever. What do anything else you want to say in wrapping this up?
No, again, I would say if there's opportunities, you as an employer or as an employee, you could go to your employer and say, hey, I paid for this, because I think a lot of people, they made expenditures just because they had to, because it was just like, I don't know what's happening. I got to work from home now. It could potentially be a benefit on both sides to go back to the table and say, okay, what was actually spent and what could be considered a reasonable expense, and have that deduction and the tax-free nature to it.
I love it. We'll see how many of our team members are watching. Absolutely love it. Go to betterwealth.com/tax if you want to learn more about what we're up to on the BetterWealth tax front. And I also just want to remind everybody that we are not giving tax advice, and consult your tax professional CPA on your personal situation, because like all these things, we want to make you aware and kind of have some light bulb moments to say, oh, this would be a good question, but we can't give tax advice without seeing your situation. And so with that, thank you, Right Hand Dan, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for listening to the BetterWealth podcast. It would mean the world to me if you could hit subscribe, leave a review, and share this with the people that you know and love.